Lie down, spread your legs wide. I'll fuck you until you're pregnant, and I won't stop before that happens." Those cold, ruthless words echoed in the luxurious penthouse on a freezing winter night in New York. Spoken by the most powerful man in the Koreatown underworld to a young, impoverished, emaciated woman clutching her trembling 4-year-old son in fear of the cold. Could a starving, desperate single mother become the most intense love of a notorious, cruel mafia boss's life? Could a $3 million debt buy a wife, or buy an entire family, a future, and a heart that had been frozen for decades? The story about to unfold will make you shudder at the initial cruelty, hold your breath through bloody underground battles, and melt at a love that transcends all boundaries of wealth, poverty, race, and sin. Do you dare continue listening to their journey from hell to heaven? Stay with us, because in just the next 45 seconds, you won't be able to take your eyes off this drama-filled Korean-American mafia romance. Before we dive into this chilling and mysterious story, please remember to subscribe to the channel Crimson Romance Stories and like this video. Every subscription, like, and share from you is a huge spiritual gift and an incredibly profound source of motivation for the channel's growth, so we can continue bringing wonderful videos every day to everyone. There would be no greater joy than receiving your love and support through the comments you leave right below this video. Comments sharing your emotions or telling us which province or city you're living and working in while listening to this story. Alright, let's continue together and immerse ourselves in this amazing, captivating story that's filled with deep emotions. I sat alone in the study of my Upper East Side penthouse, the floor-to-ceiling windows framing the relentless glitter of Manhattan below. It was December 20th, 2025, and the city pulsed with holiday lights along Fifth Avenue, taxis crawling through slushy streets while the wind off the Hudson cut like a blade. My name is Alexander Kang, 61 years old, fair-skinned, born to Korean parents who had arrived in Flushing with nothing and died before seeing what I became. Now I controlled the hidden economy of New York's Koreatown in Midtown and beyond. Underground baccarat rooms behind karaoke lounges on 32nd Street, protection for restaurants and nail salons stretching into Queens, import containers at the Port of Newark that never saw a thorough search. On paper, I was the respected owner of a chain of luxury Korean spas scattered across Manhattan and Brooklyn. Places of heated ondol floors, herbal steam, and absolute discretion where politicians and financiers came to wash away their tension. In truth, I was the head of the Black Lotus, and my name carried weight in rooms where no cameras were allowed. The penthouse was silent except for the low hum of the fireplace. Too much space, too much glass and marble, a few quiet touches of heritage, a Hanji screen in the hallway, a low lacquered table for tea I never poured. Loneliness had become a second skin. Guilt lived deeper, a constant gnawing at the edges of every decision I made. I had buried family, ended rivals, built an empire on fear and favor, and still had no heir. The inner storm never quieted. Regret for the blood on my ledger. Isolation I had chosen to keep the fracture in my heart from showing. The desperate wish for something, someone, to inherit what I had built before age took me. My phone vibrated against the mahogany desk. Victor. Boss, we picked up Darius Jackson. $3 million gone in the back room at the Diamond Palace on 32nd. He's got nothing left, but he's offering his sister, Aaliyah Jackson, 24, single mom to a 4-year-old boy, Malik. Says she's the only thing he has. A woman and her child. The offer should have been business. I had accepted worse collateral. Yet the thought lodged like a splinter, guilt flaring hotter, the fracture widening. Bring them here, I said, voice flat. Tonight. I watched the black SUVs pull into the private garage below. Darius stumbled out first, head bowed, coat too thin for the biting December wind. Then her. The first time I looked at her, I felt nothing but the familiar calm of power settling into place. My gaze lingered only long enough to assess, then moved on, like someone confirming the value of an object already priced. There was no curiosity, no disturbance. In my mind, everything had its place: debts, arrangements, consequences. She was merely a small variable inside a problem I had solved countless times before. But the calm shattered almost instantly. Aaliyah stepped into the harsh light of the garage, clutching Malik against her. The boy's jacket was threadbare, hood up against the wind tunneling between buildings. His small face was pale with cold and fear. She looked as though survival had carved pieces from her. Thin from too many nights feeding her son before herself, dark skin dulled by exhaustion and hunger, eyes shadowed by weeks without proper sleep. Her coat was secondhand, zipper broken, jeans worn soft at the knees, boots cracked from city salt and snow. She moved with the careful economy of someone who had learned that every calorie, every dollar, every moment mattered. The raw evidence of poverty was unmistakable. The slight tremor in her hands from low blood sugar, the way she hunched against the wind as though it had beaten her for years, the quiet humiliation of knowing armed men were watching her every move. The contrast between us was merciless. I stood warm in cashmere and wool, the heated penthouse waiting above, while she had clearly spent nights in some uninsulated apartment in the South Bronx or Harlem, listening to radiators clank uselessly, choosing between heat and food, waking every time Malik cried from cold or hunger. Something ignited in my chest, fierce, immediate, overwhelming. A burning surge of protectiveness, of raw want for this destitute young woman holding her terrified child. The loneliness I had carried for decades suddenly felt unbearable. Guilt tore through me harder than ever. How could the man responsible for so much ruin now crave to shelter her from it? They rode the private elevator in silence. When the doors opened into the foyer, warm lights, polished marble, the faint scent of pine and green tea. Aaliyah swayed, dizziness hitting her as the sudden heat met her chilled body. Malik clung tighter, eyes huge at the vast space. I led them to the living room where a fire roared in the stone hearth. Darius collapsed onto a sofa, muttering. Aaliyah remained standing, voice soft, restrained, careful, the tone of someone young and powerless speaking to someone far older and infinitely more dangerous. Mr. Kang, Darius said this was about money. I don't understand why we're here. Please, Malik's only 4. Whatever my brother did, don't punish him for it. Fear, confusion, shock flickered across her face in rapid waves. When she glanced at the skyline beyond the windows, disorientation made her breath hitch. I kept my exterior ice cold, voice measured. Your brother owes me $3 million. He cannot repay it. Normally, that ends with him disappearing. Darius sobbed quietly. Aaliyah's face went ashen. But there is another way, I continued. You and your son will live here. You will become my wife. You will give me a child, an heir. The debt is erased. Your brother lives. You and the boy will never know hunger or cold again. Silence fell, broken only by the fire. Her knees buckled. She caught the back of a chair, tears rising but held back through sheer will. Numbness settled over her features, then raw pain. Malik buried his face in her coat. "Become your wife?" she whispered, voice trembling yet still respectful. "Sir, I don't even know you." I stepped closer, letting the ruthless mask harden completely. The inner storm screamed, guilt, longing, self-loathing, but I buried it beneath steel. "I don't need you to like it," I said, voice low and merciless. "I only need your belly to get pregnant. Spread your legs so I can pump my seed into you." Her breath caught, eyes widening in horror. "You're only worth anything for your ability to breed," I continued, each word deliberate, cutting. "Lie down, spread your legs wide. I'll fuck you until you're pregnant and not stop before that." She flinched as though struck, arms tightening around Malik. "Not because you're hot or tasty," I finished coldly, "but because I need a son." The room felt colder despite the fire. Aaliyah stood frozen, shock giving way to a deep, trembling dread. Tears finally spilled, silent down her cheeks. Inside me, the fracture widened to a chasm. Guilt and regret roared, hating the cruelty I had just spoken, hating the necessity of the mask. Yet the fierce, burning affection only grew stronger, this desperate need to protect her, to give her everything, even if I had to drag her into my world to do it. The claim was made, ruthless, irrevocable, and in the wreckage of my heart, I already knew I was lost to her. The fire had burned low, casting long shadows across the living room. Darius sat hunched and silent, as though he had already disappeared from his own life. Malik had fallen asleep on the sofa, curled into a small ball under Aaliyah's worn coat, his breathing soft and even despite the chaos around him. Aaliyah herself stood rigid, tears drying on her cheeks, staring at me with a mixture of horror and disbelief. The words I had spoken still hung in the air like smoke, cold, deliberate, designed to strip away any illusion of choice. I turned away from her for a moment, walking to the windows. Manhattan glittered below, indifferent. Snow had begun to fall, light flakes drifting past the glass. The city was beautiful from up here, clean, ordered, mine. Yet inside my chest, the storm raged harder than any blizzard outside. Guilt clawed at me with fresh violence. I had just spoken to a starving young mother as though she were nothing more than a vessel. The ruthless mask had held, but beneath it, the fracture in my heart had widened into something raw and bleeding. How could I, a man who remembered his own mother counting pennies in Flushing, now reduce another mother to this? And yet the burning had not diminished. If anything, it grew fiercer. I wanted her, wanted to protect her, feed her, warm her, give her and her son the safety they had never known. The contradiction tore at me, the need to possess warring with the sudden, overwhelming tenderness that made me want to kneel and beg forgiveness for the cruelty I had just inflicted. I turned back. Aaliyah had sunk into a chair, her body folding as though the weight of everything had finally crushed her. She stared at the floor, hands clasped tightly in her lap, knuckles pale. Her voice, when it came, was barely above a whisper, soft, restrained. The careful tone of someone young and powerless speaking to someone far older and infinitely more dangerous. "Mr. Kang, please, there has to be another way. I'll work, I'll clean, cook, anything. Just don't. Don't make me do that. Malik needs me. He's already lost so much." The plea hit me like a blade. I saw the truth of her poverty in every trembling word. The nights she had gone without food so Malik could eat, the humiliation of food stamps and eviction notices, the cold apartments where she had wrapped him in every blanket she owned while she shivered. Her emaciation was not dramatic, it was quiet, heartbreaking. Cheekbones too sharp, collarbones visible beneath her thin sweater, wrists fragile. She had been hungry for years. I moved closer, keeping my voice low and controlled. "There is no other way. Your brother's debt is $3 million. He has nothing. You have nothing. This is the only path that keeps him breathing and puts food in your son's mouth." She looked up then, eyes glistening but fierce. "You're buying me, like I'm property." The accusation was soft, but it struck deep. Guilt surged again, hot and violent. I had spent decades justifying every dark choice, but this felt different. Wrong in a way that gnawed at the core of me. The decision came swiftly, cleanly, like a signature at the bottom of a page. I did not believe I was taking anything away. I was simply closing one path and opening another, the one I had chosen. Fate to me was something that could be arranged. And once arranged, it required no explanation. "Yes," I said quietly. "I am claiming what is owed. You will live here. You will marry me. You will bear my child. That is the arrangement." She flinched as though I had struck her. Her hand flew to her mouth, stifling a sob. Dizziness passed over her face. She gripped the arm of the chair, breathing shallow. The shock was too much for a body already weakened by hunger and exhaustion. I stepped forward instinctively, reaching to steady her, but she recoiled, fear flashing bright in her eyes. The rejection stung more than it should have. Inside, the burning affection twisted into something painful, longing mixed with remorse so intense it felt like physical illness. "Easy," I said, softer now despite myself. "You're safe here. No one will hurt you or the boy." She stared at me, confusion joining the fear. "Safe? You just threatened to To use me like—" Her voice broke. She couldn't repeat the words. I turned away again, unable to bear the accusation in her gaze. The inner turmoil was unbearable now, a violent clash between the ruthless leader who had spoken those brutal lines and the lonely man who wanted nothing more than to wrap her in warmth and promise she would never suffer again. Before I could respond, my phone buzzed. Victor's name flashed. I answered, keeping my voice neutral.
"Speak." "Boss, we've got trouble. Tommy Park's crew just hit one of our karaoke spots on 32nd. They roughed up the manager, took the night's take. Word is they're saying the Jackson debt makes us look weak, that we're going soft." Anger flared, sharp and familiar. Tommy Park, ambitious, stupid, always probing for weakness. This was a direct challenge. "Handle it," I said, quietly. "Send a message, but no bodies, not tonight." I ended the call and looked back at Aaliyah. She had heard enough to understand danger circled this world. Fresh fear crossed her face. "Your rivals?" she whispered. I nodded once. "They smell blood, but they won't touch you." Even as I said it, unease stirred. Tommy wouldn't stop at a robbery. If he learned about the arrangement, he might see Aaliyah and Malik as leverage. The thought ignited something primal. I would burn the city before letting anyone near them. A soft knock interrupted. Mrs. Kim, my housekeeper, appeared, a Korean woman in her 50s who had been with me for 20 years. She took in the scene with quiet understanding. "Sir, I've prepared the guest suite on the east wing. Warm bath, fresh clothes, food for the child when he wakes." I nodded. "Take them." Aaliyah stood slowly, lifting Malik into her arms. The boy stirred but did not wake. She was trembling with exhaustion, yet her hold on him was fierce, protective. As Mrs. Kim led her toward the hallway, Aaliyah paused at the threshold and looked back at me. Her voice was barely audible, soft and careful. "Why me? You could have anyone. Why this?" The question hung between us. I could have given the cold answer, youth, health, desperation that guaranteed compliance. Instead, something else slipped out, low and honest despite myself. "Because you need it, and because I can give it." Confusion flickered in her eyes, then cautious curiosity. She disappeared down the hall, Mrs. Kim's gentle murmur guiding her. I stood alone in the vast room, the fire dying to embers. The inner storm reached a new peak. Guilt for the cruelty I had shown, remorse for the life I was forcing upon her, and beneath it all, that fierce, burning attachment growing stronger by the minute. I had arranged her fate with ruthless efficiency, but in doing so, I had shattered something in myself. Hours later, unable to sleep, I walked the quiet halls. Passing the guest suite, I heard soft crying, Aaliyah, muffled against a pillow so Malik would not wake. Each sob was a knife in my chest. I stopped outside the door, hand raised to knock, then let it fall. What could I say? That I was sorry? That the brutal words had been armor against feelings I didn't understand? That seeing her hunger and fear had awakened a tenderness I thought long dead? Instead, I stood in the shadows, listening to her grief, the weight of my own remorse crushing me. Downstairs, Victor called again. "Boss, Tommy's men are moving. They're asking questions about the girl. Word's out that you brought collateral home." Rage surged, hot and clean. I grabbed my coat. "Gather the crew. We end this tonight." I stepped into the elevator, the penthouse lights dimming behind me. Snow fell harder now, blanketing the city. As the doors closed, one thought burned clearer than any other. No one would touch her. No one would hurt her again. Not while I breathed. The confrontation was coming, on icy streets, in dimly lit alleys, and I would meet it with every ounce of power I possessed. For the first time in years, I had something worth protecting, and God help anyone who tried to take it from me. Dawn broke over Manhattan in pale gray light, snow still falling softly against the penthouse windows. I had not slept. After the street confrontation with Tommy Park's men, nothing more than a tense standoff in the Koreatown alley, words sharper than knives, my crew outnumbering theirs until they backed down.
I had returned home with blood on my knuckles from a single warning punch and fire in my veins. No one had been seriously hurt, but the message was sent. The debt, the woman, the child, they were under my protection now, untouchable. Yet the real violence had been inside me all night. Guilt had become a living thing, gnawing relentlessly at every memory of Aaliyah's tear-streaked face, her soft, terrified voice repeating my brutal words. I had stood outside her door until the early hours, listening to her quiet crying fade into exhausted silence, hating myself with an intensity I had not felt in decades. The ruthless mask I wore for the world had cracked wide open in the dark, revealing the fractured man beneath, the one who had spoken those cruel lines, only to hide the sudden, overwhelming tenderness that threatened to undo him. I needed an heir. That was the cold truth I had armored myself with. But the deeper truth, the one that burned hotter with every passing hour, was that I needed her. Not just her body, her presence, her light in the vast emptiness of my life. The attachment had taken root like wildfire, fierce and uncontrollable, and it terrified me more than any rival ever could. Mrs. Kim found me in the study at first light, coffee in hand though I had not asked for it. She had served me long enough to read the storms in my silence. The girl and the boy slept finally, she said quietly, in Korean. She bathed, ate a little. The child ate more. They are overwhelmed. I nodded once. Prepare everything. The ceremony will be this evening. Private. Judge Harlan owes me favors. He will officiate. No delays. Mrs. Kim hesitated, her eyes gentle but unafraid. Sir, she is very young, very frightened. The words struck like salt in an open wound. Remorse surged again, violent and numbing. I know, I said, voice rough, but there is no other way. She bowed and left. I stood at the window, watching snow blanket Central Park far below, and felt the inner conflict reach a new, tearing peak. I was saving her from the streets, from hunger, from the cold that had already taken pieces of her health. Wasn't I? Or was I simply dragging her deeper into my darkness because I could not bear my loneliness anymore? By late afternoon, the penthouse had transformed under Mrs. Kim's quiet direction. The living room, usually stark and modern, now held simple arrangements of white orchids and evergreen boughs, a nod to the season without excess. A low table had been set with a traditional Korean tea set, though no tea would be poured today. The judge arrived discreetly, an older white man in a dark suit who knew better than to ask questions. Aaliyah appeared at the hallway entrance precisely on time, guided by Mrs. Kim. She wore a simple ivory dress Mrs. Kim had acquired, elegant, modest, with subtle hanbok-inspired silk panels at the sleeves and hem that caught the firelight. It fit her perfectly, though she looked painfully thin in it, collarbones sharp above the neckline. Her hair had been smoothed back into a low bun, a single Norige-style pendant, jade and silver, that Mrs. Kim had fastened at her throat. The ornament was a quiet gesture of protection in my culture, though Aaliyah could not have known that. Malik walked beside her, dressed in a small navy suit, clutching her hand. His eyes were wide with cautious wonder at the flowers and lights, though he stayed close to his mother. Aaliyah's face was pale, composed through sheer will. When she saw me waiting in a tailored black suit, something flickered across her features, dread deepening into numbness, then a flash of disorientation as though the reality of this moment still refused to settle. She swayed slightly, and Mrs. Kim steadied her with a gentle hand at her elbow. I stepped forward, the ruthless exterior locked in place, but inside the turmoil was deafening. Seeing her like this, clean, warm, dressed in beauty she had never been allowed to own, intensified the burning attachment to an almost unbearable degree. I wanted to shield her from every memory of cold nights and empty cupboards. I wanted to kneel and promise her the world. Instead, I stood still and silent. He did not rush. Time had always favored men who knew how to wait. My silence carried more weight than commands ever could. I understood that fear, when not forced, would arrive on its own. This was patience sharpened by decades, when violence was no longer the preferred tool, but the final option. The judge began. Simple words, legal words.
Darius stood in the corner, head bowed, unable to meet anyone's eyes. Malik sat quietly on a sofa with Mrs. Kim, clutching a small stuffed bear she had given him. When it was time for vows, Aaliyah's voice was soft, restrained, barely audible, timid and respectful, as always when addressing me. "I take you, Alexander Kang, to be my husband." Each word seemed to cost her. Her hand trembled in mine as I slid the ring onto her finger, a platinum band with a single flawless diamond, understated but worth more than she could imagine. My own hand was steady, though inside I felt the emotional rupture widening. Guilt for forcing this, remorse for the terror in her eyes, and beneath it all, the fierce, passionate attachment that made me want to protect her from everything, including myself. I spoke my vows calmly, clearly. When the judge pronounced us married, I leaned in for the briefest kiss, barely a brush of lips against her cheek, more claim than affection. She stiffened but did not pull away. It was done. She was mine now, legally, irrevocably. The small gathering dispersed quietly. Darius was escorted out with a warning never to return without permission. The judge left with an envelope thick enough to ensure his silence. Mrs. Kim took Malik to the kitchen for warm milk and cookies, giving us the illusion of privacy. We stood alone by the windows. Snow fell thicker now, muffling the city sounds far below. Aaliyah stared at her ring as though it belonged to someone else. "It's beautiful," she whispered, voice soft and careful. "I've never owned anything like this." The innocence of the admission broke something in me. I saw again the stark contrast, her life of second-hand clothes and bare cupboards against the effortless wealth surrounding her now. Tears welled in her eyes, but she blinked them back. I moved closer, keeping my voice low. "You will never want again. Neither will your son." She looked up, confusion joining the fear. "And what you said last night, about using me?" Her words faltered, cheeks flushing with humiliation. The memory of my own cruelty hit like a fresh wound. Remorse surged so violently I nearly staggered. I had meant to terrify her into compliance, to hide the tenderness I could not yet admit. Now the brutality of it shamed me. I reached out slowly, giving her time to move away, and brushed a stray tear from her cheek with my thumb. She froze, but did not recoil. "Not tonight," I said quietly. "You are exhausted. The boy is exhausted. Tonight you rest. We have time." Shock flickered across her face, then cautious curiosity. She searched my eyes as though looking for the trap. "Why?" she whispered. "After what you said." The question hung between us. I could have given the cold answer: strategy, patience, control. Instead, the truth slipped out, raw and unguarded. "Because I am not the monster you think I am, not entirely." Her breath caught. For a moment, the fear softened into something fragile. Confusion, perhaps the faintest glimmer of hope. Before she could respond, my phone vibrated harshly. "Victor." I answered, turning slightly away. "Speak." "Boss, Tommy Park just put a tail on your brother-in-law's car as he left. They're making a statement. And word spreading fast about the wedding. Some of the old captains are grumbling, saying you're distracted by the girl." Rage flared, hot and immediate. But beneath it, fear, not for myself, but for her, for Malik. I ended the call. Aaliyah had heard enough to pale again. "They're coming for me?" she asked, voice trembling. "No," I said firmly. "They're testing me, but they will learn quickly." I called Mrs. Kim to take Aaliyah and Malik to the master wing, my wing, where the security was absolute. As she turned to go, she paused. "Thank you," she said softly, almost inaudibly, "for not tonight." The small gratitude, offered despite everything, pierced me deeper than any accusation could have. I watched her walk away, Malik's hand in hers, and felt the inner storm reach a crescendo. Guilt, remorse, and that fierce, burning love all twisting together until I could barely breathe. I grabbed my coat. Time to remind the city who I was. And to make certain no one ever threatened what was now mine, my wife, my family, the fragile light I had claimed from the darkness. The days after the wedding settled into a strange, suspended rhythm. Snow continued to fall over Manhattan, blanketing the city in temporary silence, while inside the penthouse warmth and plenty reigned. I kept my distance at first, sleeping in the guest wing, giving Aaliyah the master suite with Malik. It was not mercy, it was strategy, or so I told myself. Time would soften resistance, fear would dull into acceptance. But the truth was simpler and far more dangerous. I could not bear to be near her without the mask slipping. Every glimpse of her, thin shoulders under borrowed silk robes, careful steps through halls she still feared, ignited the burning attachment deeper into my chest. Guilt and remorse had become constant companions, gnawing with increasing ferocity. I had forced a destitute mother into marriage with brutal words. Yet now I found myself rearranging my world to shield her from every discomfort. Mrs. Kim became the quiet bridge. She brought trays of food to Aaliyah's rooms. Warm rice porridge with ginseng in the mornings, bulgogi and banchan at lunch, hearty jjigae stews in the evenings, dishes meant to restore strength to someone who had gone hungry too long. Malik ate with the unreserved appetite of a child who had known empty cupboards. Aaliyah picked at her portions at first, as though expecting them to vanish. Slowly, color returned to her cheeks. The sharp edges of hunger began to soften. I watched from security feeds when I could not sleep, never invading privacy, only the common areas. Seeing her sit with Malik at the low-lacquered table, teaching him to hold chopsticks, or reading him picture books Mrs. Kim had bought, sent quiet, emotionally condensed waves of tenderness through me. The loneliness I had carried for decades felt suddenly unbearable. I wanted to be part of those moments. I wanted to be the one bringing smiles to their faces. Then something small made me slow down. She did not break the way others did. She learned, quietly, stubbornly. I began watching from a distance, not to control, but to understand. Somewhere, barely formed, a thought surfaced. Perhaps she was not like anyone I had known before. One morning, 10 days after the wedding, I found her in the library, a room I rarely used. Lined with books in Korean and English, I had collected more for appearance than reading. She stood on tiptoe, reaching for a volume on the highest shelf, Malik playing quietly on the rug with wooden blocks. The dress she wore, simple cashmere, soft gray, was one Mrs. Kim had chosen, and it hung loosely on her still thin frame. I paused in the doorway. She sensed me and turned, caution flickering across her face before settling into that careful, respectful posture. "Mr. Kang," she said softly, voice timid. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to disturb anything. Malik likes stories, and Mrs. Kim said it was all right." The apology for existing in my home struck like a fresh wound. Remorse surged, violent and numbing. "It's yours now," I said quietly. "Everything here is yours." Confusion passed over her features, then cautious curiosity. She glanced at the book in her hand, a children's collection of Korean folktales, beautifully illustrated. "This is in English and another language." "Korean," I said. "I can read them to him, if you like." The offer slipped out before I could stop it. Her eyes widened slightly, shock, then something softer. She nodded, almost shyly. That evening, I sat on the rug with Malik between us, reading the tale of the tiger and the rabbit. My voice, usually reserved for commands and threats, softened without effort. Malik leaned against me, unafraid. Aaliyah watched from the armchair, hands folded in her lap, a faint wonder in her expression. When the story ended, Malik yawned and curled into her side. "Thank you," she whispered, voice restrained but sincere. He's never had anyone read to him like that. The small moment lingered, tender and fragile. Inside me, the burning attachment flared brighter, intertwined now with a profound ache for the years she had struggled alone, for the They were watching us, she said softly, voice trembling. Two men in a black car. They smiled when I looked. I moved to her side, careful not to crowd. They won't come closer. How can you be sure? Dread deepened in her eyes, then disorientation as the reality of danger settled again. Because I will stop them. That night, I met Tommy's lieutenants in a dimly lit parking garage beneath a Koreatown office building. No weapons drawn, just words, presence, numbers. My crew outnumbered theirs 2-1. I stood calm in my long black coat, snow melting on my shoulders. "Tell Tommy," I said quietly. "The next time his dogs get within a block of my wife or my son, I take territory, starting with the Diamond Palace." They backed down, muttering promises. The standoff ended without a blow, but the message was clear. War was coming if Tommy pushed further. When I returned home near dawn, I found Aaliyah in the kitchen, warming milk for Malik, who had woken from a nightmare. She wore a thick robe over pajamas, feet bare on the heated floors, a small luxury she still seemed surprised by. "You're safe," I said from the doorway. She turned, eyes searching my face. "Were you out there because of us?" I nodded once. Caution gave way to something raw, gratitude mixed with confusion and lingering fear. "I don't understand you," she whispered. "You say those terrible things, then you protect us like this." The honesty struck deep. Guilt and remorse crested again, tearing at me. I stepped closer, voice low. "I said what I said to make you stay, because I cannot let you go back to what was before." Her breath caught. Shock flickered, then deep disorientation. Before was cold and hungry and scary, but it was mine. The quiet admission of the heartbreaking humiliation of her poverty, the nights she had wrapped Malik in every blanket while she shivered, broke something open in me. I reached out slowly, cupping her cheek with one hand. She did not pull away. Her skin was warm now, soft from the creams Mrs. Kim provided, but I could still feel the fragility beneath. "No more," I said, the words rough with emotion I could no longer hide. "Never again." For a moment, she leaned into the touch, barely perceptible, but there. Curiosity deepened in her eyes, fear softening into cautious wonder. Malik's small voice called from the bedroom. She slipped away to him, leaving me standing in the warm light, heart pounding with the force of what I felt. The gilded cage was holding her, yes, but it was beginning to feel less like a prison and more like the only place I ever wanted her to be. And somewhere in the quiet hours that followed, I admitted to myself what I had known since the first night. I was no longer arranging fate. I was falling into it, helpless, burning, and utterly changed. February arrived with a brief thaw, turning Manhattan streets into rivers of slush and steam. 3 months had passed since the wedding, and the penthouse no longer felt like a cage to Aaliyah, at least not entirely. She moved through the rooms with growing confidence, helping Mrs. Kim in the kitchen, reading to Malik in the library, even asking quiet questions about the Hanji artwork on the walls. Her body had begun to fill out, cheeks less hollow, arms less fragile, from steady meals and rest. The stark evidence of her former hunger lingered only in the careful way she still portioned food, as though expecting scarcity to return. I watched the change with a hunger of my own. The burning attachment had not faded. It had deepened into something fierce and constant, a fire I carried beneath the calm exterior. Every small smile she gave Malik, every cautious glance she sent my way, fed it. Yet guilt and remorse walked beside it, relentless. I had forced her here with cruel words, stripped her of choice, and now I stood in silent awe as she rebuilt herself in my world. The inner turmoil had become a daily war, the ruthless leader who had claimed her, warring with the man who wanted only to worship the ground she walked on. To the outside world, it was time she was seen. The annual Black Lotus charity gala, held under the legitimate cover of my spa empire, was the perfect stage. Held in a grand ballroom at a Midtown hotel, it drew Koreatown business owners, politicians who accepted my donations, and rival faction leaders who came to measure strength. Attendance was mandatory for alliances. Absence was insult. I informed Aaliyah 1 week prior. She stood in the master closet, now filled with clothes tailored to her, holding a deep emerald gown Mrs. Kim had chosen. Silk with subtle hanbok-inspired embroidery along the neckline, elegant and understated. "I've never been to anything like this," she said softly, voice restrained and timid. "I don't know how to act. What if I say something wrong?" Fear flickered in her eyes, then cautious determination. The contrast to the broken woman who had arrived in December struck me anew. The emaciated frame that had trembled in the cold garage. The nights of hunger and humiliation now replaced by warmth and plenty. Yet the memory of her suffering fueled my remorse like fresh kindling. "You will stand beside me," I said quietly. "That is enough." Inside, pride stirred, unwanted, unnamed, at the thought of showing her to the world as mine. The night arrived cold and clear. We descended in the private elevator, Aaliyah's hand resting lightly on my arm as instructed. She wore the emerald gown like it had been made for her, the Norige pendant at her throat catching the light. Her hair was swept up, revealing the graceful line of her neck. Malik had been left with Mrs. Kim and 2 trusted guards, safe, asleep, unaware. In the limousine, she stared out at the city lights, breath fogging the window briefly. "I used to walk these streets, looking for warm grates in winter," she whispered, almost to herself. "Now, I'm riding in this." The quiet confession of cold winds that had bitten through thin coats, of nights curled on subway platforms with Malik in her arms, tore at me. I covered her hand with mine, a rare touch. She did not pull away. At the hotel, cameras flashed discreetly, invited press who knew better than to print anything without approval. We moved through the lobby into the ballroom, crystal chandeliers, tables laden with banchan and fusion dishes, a string quartet playing softly. Heads turned, whispers followed. "She is so young. Where did he find her? An American, really? And with a child, they say." Aaliyah kept her chin high, though I felt the slight tremor in her arm. She mirrored me without realizing, posture straight, expression composed, silence when words were unnecessary. She began to mirror him, knowing when to stay silent, when to hold her ground, when not to retreat without reason. I noticed with the faintest curve of a smile. It was not affection. It was the rare sensation of seeing a sharp mind taking shape in my shadow. Interest followed, accompanied by a quiet pride I refused to name. We circulated. I introduced her simply, my wife, Alexander Kang. She answered questions with soft, careful politeness, where she was from, a small smile, vague, how she liked New York, better now, with gentle humor that surprised a laugh from a councilman. Her resilience shone quietly, and I felt that unnamed pride swell. Then Tommy Park approached. He was younger than me by 15 years, ambitious, always dressed too flashily. Tonight, a charcoal suit with a red pocket square, like blood against snow. His smile was all teeth. "Alexander," he said in Korean, loud enough for nearby ears. Then switching to English, eyes on Aaliyah. "And this must be the new Mrs. Kang. Quite the acquisition." The insult was veiled but clear. Whispers rippled outward. Aaliyah's hand tightened on my arm, fear flashing before she controlled it. Tommy leaned closer, voice dripping false charm. "Tell me, dear, does he keep you in the penthouse like a pretty bird? Or do you get to fly a little?" The ballroom quieted by degrees. All eyes turned, waiting for my response, or hers. I felt rage rise, cold and precise. But before I could speak, Aaliyah lifted her chin. Her voice was soft, restrained, but it carried. Clear, steady, edged with steel I had not heard before. "I'm exactly where I choose to be, Mr. Park," she said. "Perhaps you should worry about your own cage." A beat of stunned silence, then muffled gasps, a few choked laughs. Tommy's smile froze, eyes narrowing to slits. I did something I rarely do in public. I laughed. Low, genuine, cutting through the tension. "My wife," I said, voice carrying pride I no longer bothered to hide, "handles herself perfectly. Perhaps next time you'll remember that." We moved away, leaving Tommy humiliated in the center of the room. Aaliyah's hand trembled now with adrenaline, not fear. I guided her to a quieter alcove near the windows, city lights sprawling below. "That was dangerous," I said quietly, but approval warmed my tone. She looked up, eyes wide with shock at her own boldness. I don't know where that came from." "From watching," I said, "from learning, and from surviving," I thought.
from years of cold winds and empty stomachs that had forged a quiet strength I was only beginning to understand. Her breath came faster, dizziness passing over her features as the moment caught up. I steadied her with a hand at her waist. "Breathe," I murmured. She did, leaning slightly into my touch. For the first time, she did not pull away immediately. Curiosity deepened in her gaze, fear receding into something fragile and new. "You were proud of me," she whispered, as though testing the words. "Yes," I admitted, the truth slipping free. "I was." The moment hung, tender and charged. Inside me, the inner storm reached a new peak, remorse for the cruelty that had brought her here, guilt for the world I had pulled her into, and beneath it all the overwhelming, burning love that made every risk worthwhile. But the night was not over. As we prepared to leave, Victor appeared at my side, face grim. "Tommy's men are outside, blocking the valet. They want to talk." Rage flared again. I guided Aaliyah toward the private exit, but she stopped me. "No," she said softly but firmly. "If this is because of me, I walk out with you." The quiet courage undid me. Pride and protectiveness surged in equal measure. We exited together into the cold night air. Tommy's crew, 6 men, waited near the line of black cars, breath fogging in the chill. No weapons visible, but tension thick. Tommy stepped forward. "A word, Alexander. About territory. About respect." I positioned Aaliyah slightly behind me, my crew fanning out. "Say it here," I said coldly. He glanced at Aaliyah, smirk returning. "Maybe without the distraction." She stepped forward before I could stop her, close to my side, voice steady. "I'm not going anywhere." The men shifted, uneasy. Tommy's smirk faltered. I met his gaze. "You heard my wife. Speak or leave." The standoff lasted seconds that felt like hours. Finally, Tommy backed down, muttering about another time. We returned to the limousine unscathed, but as the city blurred past the windows, Aaliyah leaned against the seat, exhaustion and adrenaline crashing together. Tears welled silently. "I was so scared," she whispered, "but I couldn't let him think he'd won." I took her hand, fully this time, lacing our fingers. She let me. "You didn't," I said. "You were magnificent." In the quiet of the ride home, something shifted irrevocably. The suspicion in her eyes had softened into trust. Not complete, but real. And the fire in my heart burned brighter than any rival's threat ever could. She was no longer just the woman I had claimed. She was the one I would burn the world down to keep. Spring crept into New York slowly, cherry blossoms appearing along the Hudson and in hidden pockets of Koreatown courtyards. 4 months had passed since the gala, and the penthouse had become something closer to a home than I had ever known. Malik's laughter echoed through the halls as he chased Mrs. Kim's cat with wooden toys I had imported from Seoul. Aaliyah's presence filled the spaces I had long left empty, her quiet humming in the kitchen while preparing simple American dishes alongside Korean ones. Her soft voice reading bedtime stories that drifted through the monitors when I worked late. Her body had changed noticeably, the sharp angles of hunger rounded by consistent nourishment, skin glowing from rest and care. Yet traces of her former life lingered in small habits, the way she still folded leftovers carefully, as though tomorrow might bring scarcity again. The cautious gratitude in her eyes when a new dress appeared in the closet. Those reminders fueled my remorse daily, a gnawing ache that intensified with every evidence of how deeply poverty had wounded her. The burning love had not cooled. If anything, it consumed me more fiercely. Nights found me standing outside the master suite door, listening to her breathe, fighting the urge to enter and confess everything I felt. Guilt warred with desire. I had forced her here with ruthless words, yet now I lived for the moment she looked at me without fear. We had fallen into quiet rituals. Evenings often brought us to the low tea table in the living room, where Mrs. Kim left a traditional Korean tea set, celadon cups, barley or ginseng brew steaming gently. Aaliyah had begun asking questions about the herbs, the customs, the stories behind the Hanji screens. Her curiosity was cautious but genuine, voice always soft and respectful when addressing me. One April evening, after Malik had gone to sleep, We sat across from each other in the dim light of the fireplace. Snow had given way to rain pattering against the windows. She poured the tea with growing steadiness, hands no longer trembling from weakness. "This one smells like roasted corn," she said quietly, inhaling the steam. "Voricha," I replied. "Good for calm." She nodded, sipping carefully. Silence settled, comfortable now rather than strained. "You were quiet today," I observed. She set her cup down, fingers tracing the rim. "I heard Victor talking to you on the phone. More trouble with Mr. Park." The mention tightened my chest. Tommy had not relented. Small harassments escalating. Anonymous threats left at spa entrances. Suppliers suddenly canceling orders. Nothing direct enough for open war, but enough to keep tension high. "He won't touch you," I said firmly. Her eyes met mine, less fear now, more concern. "But he's trying to hurt you through me, because of the gala." The memory of her standing up to Tommy, of the pride that had surged through me unbidden, returned sharply. When she was insulted in public, I reacted before thought could intervene. I had stood beside her without justification, because my honor had been touched. In that moment, the boundary shifted. She was no longer property, but part of my public authority. Jealousy surfaced, sharp and unmistakable. "Yes," I admitted, "because he saw what I see." Confusion flickered across her face, then cautious curiosity. "What do you see?" I leaned forward, the words coming low and rough. "Strength, intelligence, beauty that has nothing to do with dresses or jewels." Shock passed over her features, disorientation making her breath catch. No one had spoken to her like this in years of struggle, of being invisible on cold streets with a hungry child. "You don't have to say that," she whispered, voice timid. "I say what is true." The air between us thickened. She looked away first, cheeks warming. But the seed was planted. Tension built in other ways. Tommy's provocations grew bolder. One rainy afternoon, Aaliyah took Malik to a nearby playground, escorted by 2 guards, a routine I had insisted on. Tommy's men appeared across the street, 3 figures in dark coats, watching openly. No approach, just presence. Malik noticed nothing, laughing on the swings. Aaliyah did, fear returning full force, dizziness sweeping her as memories of past dangers flooded back. She returned pale, holding Malik too tightly. I met them in the foyer. "They were there again," she said softly, voice trembling. "Just watching." Rage exploded through me, cold and precise. But seeing her fear, remembering the emaciated woman who had arrived half-frozen in December, twisted it into something protective and fierce. I called Victor immediately. That night, I confronted Tommy directly. The meeting was in a neutral Koreatown barbecue restaurant after hours, smoke lingering in the air, tables cleared except one. Tommy sat with 4 men. I brought 5. No weapons shown, but tension crackled. "You're crossing lines," I said calmly, seating myself across from him. He smirked. "Your pretty wife enjoys playgrounds? Cute." The insult ignited jealousy sharper than before. My voice dropped to lethal quiet. "Mention her again, and we end this tonight." His men shifted, mine closed ranks. The standoff stretched, rain drumming on the roof. Finally, Tommy raised his hands in mock surrender. Message received. We left without violence, but the threat hung heavier. When I returned home near midnight, I found Aaliyah waiting in the living room, wrapped in a blanket, tea cold beside her. Malik slept safely down the hall. "You went to him," she said quietly, not accusation, but worry. I handled it. She stood, blanket slipping. The sight of her, healthy now, but still carrying the weight of past cruelties, undid me. "You could have been hurt," she whispered, stepping closer. "Because of me." The concern in her voice, for me, shattered the last careful distance. I closed the space between us, cupping her face gently. She did not pull away. "I would burn this city before letting anyone near you," I said, voice rough with everything I had held back. Her breath caught. Shock, then deep disorientation as the reality sank in. This powerful man who had taken everything from her now stood ready to give everything for her. Our eyes locked. The air charged, electric. I leaned in slowly, giving her every chance to stop me. She didn't. The kiss began careful, almost reverent, my lips brushing hers, tasting the barley tea and something uniquely her. Then hunger surged. Her hands rose to my shoulders, gripping as though anchoring herself. I deepened the kiss, one arm sliding around her waist, pulling her close. She responded, hesitant at first, then with growing need, a soft sound escaping that ignited me further. Years of her loneliness, of cold nights and desperate survival, met my decades of isolation in that kiss. It was raw, passionate, a collision of need and tenderness neither of us had expected. We broke apart breathing hard. Her eyes were wide, lips swollen, confusion and desire warring. "I can't," she whispered, but her hands still clutched my shirt. "You don't have to," I said, though every part of me ached for more. "Not yet." She stepped back, dizziness sweeping her. She steadied herself on the sofa, emotional numbness following the intensity. I watched her retreat to the bedroom, heart pounding with the force of what had just happened. The boundary had shattered completely. Jealousy, protectiveness, love, they were no longer separate. They were one consuming fire. And in the quiet aftermath, standing alone with the taste of her still on my lips, I knew there was no going back. She was mine now, not by force, but by something far more dangerous: choice. May brought warm evenings to Manhattan, the kind where windows could stay open and the distant hum of the city drifted up like a lullaby. 5 months had passed since the kiss that had shattered every careful boundary I had built. We had not repeated it, not fully. Stolen touches, lingering glances, nights when she fell asleep on the sofa with her head against my shoulder while Malik played nearby. Each moment fed the fire inside me until it threatened to consume everything. The burning love had become my constant companion, fierce and unrelenting. Yet remorse walked beside it, sharper now than ever. I had seen the change in her, the way she no longer flinched when I entered a room, the soft smile she gave freely to Malik, and even occasionally to me. She had begun to trust, and that trust felt like a gift I did not deserve, bought with cruelty and coercion. I had left for 3 days on business, legitimate spa openings in Brooklyn, but also quiet meetings to push Tommy Park further back. Before leaving, I had kissed her forehead in the doorway, a gesture that felt both natural and terrifying. She had leaned into it, eyes closing briefly. "Be safe," she had whispered, concern warm in her voice. The words had stayed with me across state lines. Upon return, late on a humid Thursday night, I entered the penthouse quietly. Mrs. Kim had retired. Malik slept. Aaliyah sat at the desk in the study, my study, light from the lamp pooling around her. Papers were spread before her, printouts, notes in her careful handwriting. She startled when I entered, guilt flashing across her face before she composed it. The reaction struck me like ice water. "What are you doing?" I asked, voice calm but edged. She stood slowly, hands clasped. I couldn't sleep. I was looking for something to read." The lie was soft, respectful, but a lie. I stepped closer, glancing at the papers. Bank records, contacts, names tied to federal investigations. My blood turned cold. One sheet bore the name of a man I recognized immediately. Special Agent Marcus Hale, undercover for 2 years, posing as a community center volunteer in Harlem. Aaliyah had mentioned him months ago, a kind man who helped with Malik's preschool application, who listened when she spoke of hard times. She had befriended him without knowing, but the notes in her handwriting, questions, dates, roots, suggested more. "Explain," I said quietly. Fear flooded her eyes, dread deepening into shock. She swayed, catching the desk as dizziness hit. "I didn't know at first," she whispered, voice trembling. "He came to the center before you, helped with food vouchers. Then, after we moved here, he reached out, said he was worried about me disappearing so suddenly.
I thought he was just being kind. Her words spilled faster, soft and pleading. He asked questions about you, about how I ended up here. I didn't tell him anything important, I swear. But then he showed me his badge. Said if I helped, he could get me and Malik away, safe, free. The confession landed like a blade. Betrayal, unintentional, born of fear, but betrayal nonetheless. Inside me, the inner storm erupted into chaos. Jealousy first, sharp, visceral, at the thought of another man offering her escape from me. Then pain, raw, numbing, at the realization she had still dreamed of leaving. Finally, terror. If the FBI closed in, everything I had built to protect her could crumble. Desire slipped into spaces I believed were sealed shut.
I realized I wanted her in a way I did not recognize, not to take, but to crave. Control, the trait I prized most, began to fracture. For the first time, I was afraid of my own emotions. I turned away, gripping the back of a chair until wood creaked. "You considered it," I said, voice low and rough. "Leaving." Silence stretched, then her soft, broken whisper. At first, when I was still scared, but not anymore. I destroyed the burner phone he gave me. I was trying to figure out how to tell you, how to protect you. The sincerity in her voice cut deeper than accusation could have. I looked back. Tears streamed down her cheeks, but she did not look away. "I chose you," she said, voice trembling yet steady, even before I understood what that meant. The emotional rupture was complete. Guilt crashed over me in waves, for the cruelty that had made her doubt, for the world that had taught her powerful men only took. I crossed the room in 2 strides, pulling her into my arms. She came willingly, burying her face against my chest, sobs muffled against my shirt. "I'm sorry," she whispered over and over. "I should have told you sooner." I held her tighter, breathing in the scent of her hair, the warmth of her body that had once been so fragile from hunger. "No more secrets," I said against her temple, "from either of us." She nodded, clinging as though afraid I would let go. The revelation changed everything and nothing. Tommy Park still circled, sensing weakness. 2 nights later, his men cornered one of my drivers near a Koreatown warehouse. Rough words, slashed tires, a warning that pretty wives don't make you bulletproof. I handled it personally. A midnight meeting in an empty lot near the Hudson, rain slicking the pavement. Tommy's crew outnumbered mine briefly until reinforcements arrived. Words were exchanged, postures aggressive, but no blows landed. I left with a promise. Next time, I take something you value. Returning home at dawn, soaked and furious, I found Aaliyah waiting again, wrapped in my robe, eyes red from worry. "You're wet," she said softly, fetching a towel without asking. The simple care undid me. I let her dry my hair, her touch gentle, reverent. When she finished, I caught her wrist. "I will end this," I said, "for you, for Malik, for us." Her eyes searched mine, curiosity, fear, and something deeper. "Us?" The word hung, fragile and immense. I kissed her then, slow, deliberate, pouring every unspoken truth into it. She responded instantly, hands rising to my face, body pressing close. Desire flared, hot and mutual, but I pulled back before it consumed us. "Soon," I promised against her lips, "when you're ready." She nodded, breathless, leaning her forehead against mine. In the quiet aftermath, we sat together on the sofa, her head on my shoulder. Rain softened against the windows. "I used to pray for someone to save us," she whispered, "from the cold, from hunger. I never imagined it would be you." The confession of nights huddled in drafty apartments, of choosing between medicine and food, tore fresh wounds in my heart. I held her closer, remorse and love twisting into something unbreakable. The betrayal had not destroyed us, it had forged us stronger. And as spring deepened into summer, I knew one truth with absolute certainty. I would dismantle my empire piece by piece if it meant keeping her safe. Because she was no longer the woman I had claimed. She was the one who had claimed me. June heat settled over New York like a heavy blanket, turning sidewalks into shimmering mirages and filling the penthouse with the low hum of air conditioning. 6 months had passed since the betrayal revelation, and the fragile trust we had rebuilt felt both precious and precarious. Aaliyah no longer slept in the guest wing. She shared the master suite with me, though we had not yet crossed the final boundary. Nights were spent in quiet closeness, her head on my chest, my fingers tracing patterns on her back, speaking in murmurs about everything and nothing. The burning love had become an all-consuming force, fierce and tender in equal measure. I lived for her soft laughter when Malik said something clever, for the way she leaned into my touch without hesitation now. Yet remorse had deepened into a constant ache. Every reminder of her past, the faint scars on her hands from years of rough work, the careful way she still savored each bite of food, renewed the guilt for the cruelty that had brought her here. I had taken her choice, spoken brutal words, and now I feared the day she might regret staying. Tommy Park had gone quiet after the betrayal fallout. Too quiet. I knew it meant planning. The FBI presence had receded once Agent Hale's cover was compromised, but the damage lingered. Increased scrutiny on my legitimate businesses, whispers among allies. Then danger came too close. It happened on a humid Thursday afternoon. Aaliyah had taken Malik to a small community garden in Koreatown, one of the philanthropy projects I funded anonymously. A safe green space with raised beds and playground equipment. Guards escorted her, as always. But Tommy's men struck boldly. A van cutting off the SUV at a traffic light on 32nd Street. 4 masked figures emerging with demands to send a message. No weapons fired, only intimidation. Rough hands grabbing at the guards, one reaching for the car door where Malik sat buckled in. Aaliyah screamed, lunging to shield her son. My phone rang as I sat in a boardroom downtown. Victor's voice was tight. They hit the escort. She's safe, but shaken. We have the boy. En route home now. I left the meeting without a word, heart pounding with a fear I had never known. I reacted on instinct, without calculating cost or outcome. When I understood that she could be lost, a raw truth emerged. Some losses cannot be compensated by power. The fear was quiet, but deep enough to make my hands shake. I arrived at the penthouse before them, pacing the foyer like a caged animal. When the elevator doors opened, Aaliyah stepped out carrying Malik, who clung to her neck, face buried. She was pale, trembling, but unharmed. The guards followed, bruised but standing. She met my eyes, fear giving way to relief, then to something raw and pained. "I'm okay," she whispered, voice soft and restrained. "We're okay." But she wasn't. Shock had set in, dizziness making her sway as she set Malik down. Mrs. Kim took the boy gently, leading him away for comfort. Aaliyah's knees buckled. I caught her before she fell, guiding her to the sofa. Tears came then, silent at first, then great racking sobs that shook her entire body. I held her, murmuring meaningless reassurances, my own control fracturing. "They tried to take him," she choked out, "to scare you, because of me." The words tore at me. Guilt surged violently, for dragging her into this world, for the irrational cruelty of rivals who would target a mother and child. I had saved her from poverty's slow death only to expose her to this. "No," I said fiercely, "because of me, this ends now." That night, I confronted Tommy directly. The meeting was in an abandoned warehouse near the Brooklyn docks, neutral ground, rain pounding on the tin roof. Tommy arrived with 8 men, I brought 10. Tension crackled like lightning. "You crossed the line," I said quietly, standing face to face. He smirked. "Your wife and kid make you soft, Alexander. Time to step aside." Rage flared, but I kept it leashed. Touch them again, and I take everything. Your territory, your family, your life. The standoff stretched, men shifting, rain drumming, no one willing to draw first. Finally, Tommy backed down, muttering retreat. We parted without blood, but the fracture in alliances was complete. Returning home near dawn, I found Aaliyah awake, waiting in the dim kitchen with cold tea.
Her eyes were red-rimmed, face drawn. "You went to him," she said softly. "Not accusation, but pain." "I protected what's mine." She stood, stepping close. "But at what cost? This will never stop." The truth in her words struck deep. Emotional rupture widened, fear for her safety, remorse for the life I had imposed, love so fierce it bordered on desperation. I pulled her into my arms. She resisted briefly, then melted against me, fresh tears soaking my shirt. "I can't lose you," I admitted, voice breaking for the first time in decades. "Either of you." She pulled back slightly, searching my face, shock at my vulnerability, then deep tenderness. "You won't," she whispered, "but I'm scared. For Malik, for us." The fracture between us widened in the days that followed. She withdrew slightly, withdrawing touches, sleeping turned away. Not anger, but fear. The numbing realization that my world brought danger no wealth could fully shield. I gave her space, though it tore at me. Nights found me alone in the study, hands shaking again with that quiet, deep fear. One evening, a week later, she came to me. Rain lashed the windows, thunder rumbled over the city. "I need to know," she said softly, voice timid but steady. "If this is forever, the danger, the hiding, can you change it?" The question hung. I had begun quietly shifting assets, more into legitimate ventures, less into the shadows, but full escape felt impossible. "I'm trying," I admitted, "for you." She nodded, tears welling. Then, unexpectedly, she crossed the room and kissed me, slow, desperate, pouring every conflicting emotion into it. I responded with equal need, lifting her gently, carrying her to the bedroom. We undressed each other with trembling hands, reverent, unhurried. Her body, once marked by hunger's harshness, now soft and warm under my touch. I worshipped every inch, murmuring apologies and promises against her skin. When we came together, it was tender, intense, tears on her cheeks, my own eyes burning. Not conquest, but surrender, mutual, healing. Afterward, I held her as thunder faded. "I love you," she whispered into the dark, soft, almost disbelieving. The words shattered and rebuilt me in the same breath. "I have loved you since the first night," I confessed, voice rough. "And it terrifies me." She curled closer, hand over my heart. The confrontation with Tommy had fractured the external world. But this quiet, emotionally condensed moment began to heal the fracture between us. Danger still circled, but for the first time, we faced it together, not as captor and captive, as partners. July heat gripped New York with unrelenting force, turning the city into a furnace of asphalt and exhaust. 7 months had passed since the fragile peace we had forged in the aftermath of intimacy, and our life together had settled into a rhythm that felt almost ordinary, almost safe. Mornings began with Malik's laughter as he chased Mrs. Kim through the halls. Afternoons with Aaliyah tending small herb pots on the terrace. Evenings with the three of us sharing quiet meals while the skyline glittered beyond the windows. The physical closeness had deepened into something profound. We shared the master bed fully now, her body curling into mine each night as though seeking the warmth she had once been denied. I traced the curves that had filled out from steady nourishment, marveling at the miracle of her health restored. Yet every touch carried the weight of remorse, for the emaciated woman I had first claimed, for the years of cold winds and empty stomachs that had shaped her caution even in abundance. The burning love had become my anchor, fierce and unwavering. I no longer questioned it. I simply lived it. But the inner turmoil had intensified into a constant, violent tension. Fear that my world would one day steal her from me, guilt that I had ever spoken cruel words to bind her, remorse that my protection came laced with danger. Tommy Park had been quiet too long. I knew it meant preparation. The attack came on a sweltering Saturday evening. I was away, handling a tense negotiation in Queens over disputed territory. Aaliyah and Malik remained at the penthouse with Mrs. Kim and 4 guards. Routine. Safe. Then Victor's call shattered everything. "Boss, they hit the building. Tommy's crew. Full assault. Breached the garage. Shots fired. We're holding, but it's bad." I was in the car before he finished, tires screeching through traffic, heart pounding with that same quiet, deep fear that had shaken my hands before. The penthouse security feeds, access from my phone, showed chaos. Smoke in the private elevator hall, guards exchanging positions, Mrs. Kim barricaded in the panic room with Malik. And Aaliyah. She was not hiding. The footage revealed her in the study, my study, grabbing the heavy brass letter opener from the desk, positioning herself behind the door as footsteps approached. Her face was pale, body trembling, but determination burned bright. Two intruders burst in, masked, armed. One grabbed Mrs. Kim's arm as she emerged to distract them. The other raised his weapon toward the hallway, where Malik's cries echoed faintly. Aaliyah moved without hesitation. She struck the first man from behind, precise, forceful, targeting the pressure point as the self-defense instructor had drilled into her months ago. He staggered. She followed with the letter opener, driving it into his shoulder, not lethal, but enough to disarm. The second turned. She kicked the weapon from his hand, using momentum to shove him off balance. Guards swarmed in seconds later, securing the attackers. But in those moments, Aaliyah had protected her son, Mrs. Kim, the home we had built. I arrived as the police, my police, were containing the scene. The penthouse reeked of smoke and adrenaline. Medics tended minor wounds. Tommy's men were in custody, alive but subdued. I found Aaliyah in the master bedroom, sitting on the bed with Malik asleep against her, his face streaked with dried tears. She was shaking, adrenaline crash, shock setting in. Blood, not hers, stained her sleeve. I dropped to my knees before her, hands hovering until she nodded. Then I pulled her into my arms. He held her, not to claim, but to shield. In that moment, all roles dissolved. There was no boss, no commands, only a man guarding his vulnerability. Attachment formed silently, steady and undeniable. "You're safe," I murmured over and over, voice breaking. "You're safe." She clung to me, sobs muffled against my shoulder. "They came for Malik. I couldn't let them." Pride and terror crashed together inside me. She had used the training I forced upon her, not as a captive, but as a protector. The woman who had arrived half-starved and terrified had become fierce, capable. Mrs. Kim appeared in the doorway, bruised but steady. "She saved us," the older woman said quietly. "Fought like a lioness." I nodded, unable to speak. Later, after medics checked everyone, after Malik was tucked in with extra blankets and stories, after the penthouse was secured anew, we sat together on the terrace. City lights blurred below, thunder rumbled distant over the river. Aaliyah leaned against me, exhaustion etched in every line. "I was so scared," she whispered, voice soft and trembling. "But I thought of you, of what you would do." The confession undid me. I turned her face to mine, kissing her gently, tears mingling, hands steadying each other. "You were magnificent," I said, voice rough with emotion, brave beyond anything I deserve. Shock flickered in her eyes, then deep tenderness. "I did it for us." The words sealed something irrevocable. Tommy's attack had failed spectacularly, his men captured, evidence linking back to him irrefutable. By morning, alliances shifted, rivals distanced themselves. I did not need to retaliate, the city did it for me. But the cost lingered. In the quiet days that followed, Aaliyah withdrew slightly, not from fear of me, but from the weight of violence. Nights found her waking from nightmares, reaching for me in the dark. I held her through each one, whispering promises I was determined to keep. One evening, as summer rain cooled the air, she came to me in the study. "I need to know," she said softly, voice restrained but steady. "Can we ever be free of this?" The question pierced deep. I'd begun dismantling pieces, selling shadowed assets, expanding legitimate spas, quietly funding community programs in Harlem and Koreatown that helped mothers like she once was. "I'm trying," I admitted, "every day." She crossed to me, straddling my lap, hands framing my face. "Then try with me," she whispered, "not for me, with me." The kiss that followed was different, hungry, healing, mutual surrender. We moved to the bedroom, undressing with urgent tenderness. This time, there was no hesitation. I worshipped her body, kissing scars from old hardships, tracing curves restored by care, murmuring love in Korean and English. She responded with equal passion, nails digging into my back, tears of release on her cheeks. When we came together, it was overwhelming, intense, emotional, a union of bodies and souls forged in fire. Afterward, tangled in sheets, she rested her head on my chest. "I love you," she said again, stronger now. "All of you, even the shadows." The words broke and rebuilt me. I held her closer, the inner storm quieting for the first time in years. The brutal attack had nearly destroyed us. Instead, it had bound us unbreakable. And in the tender silence that followed, I knew, whatever came next, we would face it together. August humidity hung thick over the city, turning evenings into slow, languid breaths of warm air. 8 months had passed since the brutal attack, and the penthouse bore no visible scars. The damaged areas repaired seamlessly, security tripled. Tommy Park's remaining loyalists had scattered or switched sides. His empire crumbled quietly under pressure from allies who no longer feared him. The city's shadows realigned, and my name carried heavier weight than before. But the true shift was inside me. Aaliyah's courage that night, her fierce protection of Malik and Mrs. Kim, had rewritten everything. The woman I had claimed with ruthless words had become my equal in strength, my partner in survival. Our nights were no longer cautious. They were passionate, healing, a daily reaffirmation of the love we had confessed. I worshipped her body with reverence, tracing the curves that spoke of restored health, kissing the places where hunger had once left its mark. She met me with equal fire, hands and mouth exploring, as though memorizing the man who had both captured and freed her. Yet remorse had not lessened. If anything, it deepened with every tender moment. I remembered the emaciated frame that had trembled in the garage cold, the soft, timid voice pleading for her son's safety. I had taken her from one form of suffering only to risk another. The inner turmoil raged constantly, violent tension between the power I wielded and the vulnerability she awakened. New life slowed my view of the world. I began thinking about tomorrow, about consequences, about who I would be in a child's memory. Power no longer stood at the center. Responsibility quietly took its place. It began with small changes. I sold 2 underground clubs, redirecting funds into the legitimate spa chain. I expanded anonymous scholarships for single mothers in Harlem and Koreatown, programs that covered childcare, housing, education. Aaliyah noticed, eyes softening with quiet pride, but said nothing. Then, in late August, she missed her cycle. She told me one humid evening on the terrace, city lights sprawling below like scattered jewels. Malik slept inside. Rain threatened but held off. "I'm late," she said softly, voice restrained but laced with wonder. "The test. It's positive." The words struck like thunder. I stared at her, emotions surging so violently I could not speak at first. Joy, pure, overwhelming. Fear, sharp, immediate. Remorse, crashing anew for the child who would inherit my shadowed legacy. I pulled her into my arms, hands trembling as they settled over her still flat stomach. "A child," I whispered, voice rough. "Our child." She nodded against my chest, tears soaking my shirt. "I'm scared," she admitted quietly, "but happy, so happy." We stood there long minutes, rain finally beginning to fall soft and warm. I kissed her temple, her cheeks, her lips, tender, reverent. That night, intimacy was different, slow, profound, every touch a promise. I mapped her body with new awe, whispering endearments in Korean she was beginning to understand. She clung to me, tears of release mingling with sighs of pleasure. Afterward, tangled in sheets damp with summer heat, she rested her head on my chest. "I never thought I'd have this," she whispered. "A family, safety, love." The confession of years spent shielding Malik from cold winds, of nights praying for a miracle while hunger gnawed, tore fresh wounds in my heart. I held her closer. "You deserve all of it," I said fiercely, "and more." The pregnancy transformed us both. Aaliyah bloomed, morning nausea giving way to radiant energy, cravings for Korean pear juice and American pickles that made me smile. I became almost obsessive. Private doctors on call, schedules adjusted, every whim indulged. Malik sensed the change, patting her stomach gently and asking in his small voice when the baby would play with him. But shadows lingered. Tommy Park, broken but not vanished, made one final desperate move. A late September night, as Aaliyah rested early with fatigue, Victor called. "Park's last loyalists. They're moving on the Harlem Community Center you fund. Arson threat. Message to you." Rage flared, but tempered now by responsibility. I went personally, not with guns, but with presence. The center was a place of light, after-school programs, food pantry, classrooms where mothers like Aaliyah once was learned skills. Tommy's men, 5 desperate figures, waited in the shadows across the street. I arrived with my crew, stepping into the streetlight. "This ends tonight," I said calmly. They shifted, uneasy. No violence erupted, just words, weight, the knowledge that their leader was finished. They dispersed without incident, the threat dissolving like mist. Returning home near dawn, I found Aaliyah awake, hand protectively over her belly. "You went out," she said softly, worry in her eyes. "To protect what's ours," I replied. She stood, crossing to me, wrapping arms around my waist. "No more risks," she whispered, "for the baby." The plea struck deep. I nodded, kissing her forehead. "I'm stepping back," I confessed. "More every day. For you, for them." Shock flickered, then deep gratitude. Tears welled. "You mean it?" "With everything I am." We stood in the quiet pre-dawn light, city waking below. Her hand guided mine to her stomach, still flat, but holding our future. In that moment, the inner turmoil quieted. Guilt remained, for the past I could not erase, but responsibility burned brighter. Love, fierce, passionate, redemptive, anchored everything. The attack had nearly broken us. The new life growing within her had rebuilt us stronger. And as autumn approached, I knew this child would not inherit shadows, they would inherit light, because I would burn every darkness to give it to them. October arrived with crisp winds sweeping down the Hudson, turning leaves in Central Park to fire and gold. 9 months had passed since the new life took root inside Aaliyah, and her body had transformed into gentle curves, a rounded belly that she rested her hand on unconsciously, as though still marveling at the miracle. Malik, now 5, trailed his small palm over the swell whenever he hugged her, asking in his earnest voice when his sister would arrive to play. The pregnancy had softened the edges of our world. Mornings began with her cravings, Korean rice cakes with American maple syrup, or fresh pears sliced thin, and I indulged each one without question. Doctors visited weekly, monitoring every heartbeat. I had cleared my schedule of anything shadowed, focusing only on legitimate expansions. New spas in Brooklyn and Queens, wellness centers that employed single mothers and offered childcare. Yet the inner turmoil had not quieted. If anything, it raged fiercer. Every kick Aaliyah felt reminded me of the air I had once demanded with brutal words. Every glow in her face contrasted painfully with memories of the emaciated woman who had arrived half-frozen, pleading for her son. Guilt and remorse twisted like knives. I had forced this family into existence through coercion, yet now I would lay down my life for them. The violent tension between past sins and present love threatened to tear me apart. One cool October afternoon, Aaliyah asked to visit the Harlem Community Center I funded, the one Tommy's men had threatened months ago. She had heard me speak of it in phone calls, seen the transfers on statements she now helped review. "I want to see what you do there," she said softly, voice restrained but warm. "The good part." Curiosity shone in her eyes, tempered by the caution that lingered from her old life. I agreed immediately, though unease stirred. The center was one of my deepest secrets. Anonymous donations for years, scholarships, food programs, after-school care. I had never taken credit, never visited publicly. We arrived unannounced. Aaliyah in a soft maternity dress of deep blue, hand resting on her belly, Malik clutching her other hand, me in a simple coat, no entourage beyond 2 discreet guards. The center was alive, children laughing in the playground, mothers collecting groceries from the pantry, teens in classrooms learning job skills. The director, a kind African-American woman named Mrs. Ellis, greeted us with surprise. "Mr. Kang," she said, eyes widening. "We've never had the honor." Aaliyah glanced at me, confusion flickering. "You come here often?" Mrs. Ellis smiled.
He's the reason this place exists. Anonymous for years, scholarships, repairs, everything. But we always knew. Aaliyah's breath caught. Shock passed over her features, then deep disorientation. She swayed slightly. I steadied her with a hand at her waist. All this time, she whispered, voice trembling. I nodded once, unable to meet her eyes. Humility, for me, was the hardest act of all. Mrs. Ellis led us through. In the scholarship wall, photos of graduates, one face stood out. A younger woman, smiling proudly in cap and gown. Aaliyah stopped, hand flying to her mouth. "That's my mother," she breathed. She got her nursing degree late. Someone paid for it. She never knew who. The revelation struck like lightning. Tears welled instantly. You helped my mom," her voice broke, "before you even knew me." I could only nod again. The secret philanthropy, born years ago from guilt over lives my world had damaged, had reached back to touch her family long before fate brought her to my door. She turned to me, tears streaming. "Why didn't you tell me?" Mafia boss did not apologize. He gave choice. He gave safety. He gave a way out. This was the only language of repair he knew, not words, but actions that placed decision-making back into another's hands. "I didn't want gratitude," I said quietly. "I wanted to deserve you." The words hung raw between us. Emotional rupture widened. For her, the shock of discovering the man who had claimed her so ruthlessly had quietly eased suffering she had known her entire life. For me, the terror that she might see only manipulation. She stepped close, hands framing my face despite her rounded belly between us. "You do," she whispered fiercely. "You deserve all of it." We stood in the hallway as children played nearby, her tears soaking my shirt while I held her. Malik tugged at my coat, confused but sensing the moment's weight. Later, in the car ride home, she was quiet, processing, reflecting. When we reached the penthouse, she asked Mrs. Kim to watch Malik and led me to the terrace. Cool wind swept her hair, the city sparkled below. "I thought I knew your heart," she said softly. "The dark parts, the protective parts. But this, you've been saving people like me for years." Remorse surged anew. "Not enough," I admitted. "Never enough to balance what I've taken." She turned to me, eyes shining. "Then let me help. Let us build more, together." The offer, partnership, not submission, shattered the last remnants of my old self. I pulled her close, kissing her deeply as wind whipped around us. That night, intimacy was profound, slow, reverent, her body cradled carefully around our growing child. I kissed the swell of her belly, whispering promises to the life within. "I will be better," I murmured against her skin, "for all of you." She threaded fingers through my hair, tears falling. "You already are." The secret philanthropy, revealed at last, became our bridge. We began planning openly, new centers, expanded scholarships blending Korean and African American communities. Aaliyah's insight, born of lived poverty, shaped every decision. Tommy Park's final remnants caused one last ripple, a desperate attempt to disrupt a supply line. I handled it swiftly, a tense meeting in a Queens warehouse, words and presence ending the threat without violence. Returning home, I found Aaliyah waiting, hand on her belly. "It's over?" she asked softly. "It's over," I confirmed. Relief washed over her, then joy. She kissed me fiercely. "Then we start new," she said, "really new." In the quiet, emotionally condensed moments that followed, planning futures, feeling the baby kick, watching Malik draw pictures of his coming sister, the inner storm finally began to calm. Guilt would never vanish completely, but love, fierce, passionate, redemptive, had become stronger. And as autumn deepened, with our daughter growing safe inside the woman I cherished, I knew this was the legacy I would leave. Not power, but light. October 20th, 2025 dawned cold and clear over Manhattan. Aaliyah's pregnancy had reached its final weeks. Her belly was round and heavy, movement slowed by the weight of our daughter. She tired easily now, resting often on the terrace wrapped in soft blankets, watching leaves fall while Malik played nearby with wooden blocks carved into traditional Korean patterns. The peace we had built felt fragile, precious. I had divested nearly all shadowed holdings. Underground clubs sold, protection rackets dissolved, funds redirected into legitimate growth and expanded philanthropy. The community centers thrived openly under both our names now. Kang Jackson Foundations, blending cultures, feeding families, educating children. Aaliyah's vision shaped every new project. Her lived experience of poverty ensured no detail was overlooked. Yet one threat lingered. Remnants of federal interest, sparked by Agent Hale's compromised operation, had not fully dissipated. Quiet inquiries continued, wire transfers traced, old associates questioned. Nothing concrete enough for charges, but enough to cast a shadow over the future I wanted for my children. A future without whispers, without risk of prison tearing me from them. The inner turmoil had reached its fiercest peak. Remorse for past sins warred with terror of losing this family I had only just learned to deserve. Every kick from our unborn daughter reminded me of the air I had once demanded through cruelty. Every soft "I love you" from Aaliyah's lips felt like grace I had no right to accept. I made the decision alone, in the quiet hours before dawn. I would disappear. Not forever, but long enough for heat to die, records to age, suspicion to fade, long enough for my family to inherit only light. I arranged it meticulously. A private helicopter flight to upstate New York, a staged mechanical failure over a remote lake, wreckage prepared to suggest tragedy. My most trusted Lieutenant Victor would handle the aftermath, public grief, private truth. The legitimate empire, spas, foundations, investments would transfer fully to Aaliyah's name. Insurance, trusts, everything ironclad. At last, he stood still within a life that required no proving. I understood that I had not conquered her. I had been changed by her. Peace arrived late, but real, and in accepting it, I felt gratitude for having been saved from the man I once was. The morning I left, I woke her gently. She stirred, hand instinctively reaching for her belly. "I have to go upstate today," I said quietly. "A final loose end. I'll be back tonight." She searched my face, sensing the weight in my voice. "Promise?" I kissed her deeply, memorizing her taste, the feel of her against me. "I promise you everything," I whispered. Malik ran in then, climbing onto the bed for morning hugs. I held them both longer than usual, breathing them in. Victor waited in the garage. The flight north was silent. Over the lake, I transferred to a waiting boat, watching from a distance as the helicopter, piloted remotely, descended into controlled disaster. Flames bloomed briefly on the water. Wreckage sank. News broke within hours. Alexander Kang, prominent businessman, presumed dead in tragic accident. I watched from a remote cabin in the Adirondacks, television muted, heart fracturing as reports showed the penthouse. Aaliyah on the steps, supported by Mrs. Kim, face pale with shock. Malik clinging to her leg. She did not cry on camera, only stared into the distance, hand protectively over her belly. The image tore me apart. Guilt and remorse crashed in waves so violent, I nearly called Victor to abort the plan. But I held, for them. Days turned to weeks. I lived simply, cash only, no contact, monitoring through secure channels. Aaliyah handled the public grief with quiet strength, funeral arranged, statements read in a voice that trembled only slightly. She grew larger with our child, moving through the penthouse like a ghost of herself.
Malik asked for me every night, Mrs. Kim reported through Victor. The sacrifice was agony, but necessary. One November evening, snow beginning to fall again, I watched a broadcast. Aaliyah at a foundation event, speaking softly about continuing Alexander's vision. Her hand rested on her belly. Tears glistened but did not fall. I could bear it no longer. I left the cabin that night, driving south through darkness. The penthouse was quiet when I entered through the private garage. Victor had disabled alerts for this moment. Snow dusted my coat as I stepped into the master bedroom. Aaliyah sat by the window, silhouetted against city lights, hand tracing slow circles on her belly. She turned and froze. Shock hit her like a physical blow, eyes widening, breath catching, body swaying with dizziness. She gripped the chair, face draining of color. "No," she whispered, voice breaking. "You're dead." I crossed the room in 3 strides, dropping to my knees before her. "I'm here," I said, voice rough with weeks of silence. "I'm sorry." Tears spilled instantly. She reached out with trembling hands, touching my face as though confirming reality. "You left us," she choked. "The explosion, they said." "To protect you," I confessed. "The inquiries, the risk. I couldn't let it touch you or the children." Sobs tore from her, deep, racking months of grief released at once. I pulled her carefully into my arms, mindful of her belly, holding as she pounded weak fists against my chest. "I thought I lost you," she cried. "I thought our daughter would never know her father." The words shattered me. Remorse crested higher than ever, for the pain I had caused, for the irrational injustice of forcing her to mourn while alive. "I couldn't lose you," I admitted, voice breaking. "Not to my past." She pulled back, eyes searching mine, pain giving way to fierce love. "You stupid, stupid man," she whispered. "Don't you ever leave us again." I kissed her then, desperate, reverent, pouring every unspoken apology into it. She responded with equal passion, hands clutching my shirt, body pressing close despite her belly between us. Malik's small voice called from the doorway, drawn by noise. He ran to us, climbing into my lap with cries of "Daddy!" I held them both, tears falling unashamed. The sacrifice had torn us apart, but the reunion bound us eternal. In the quiet hours that followed, explaining to Mrs. Kim and Victor, planning my miraculous survival for public eyes, the inner storm finally stilled. Guilt would linger, but peace, real, hard-won, had arrived. Because I had chosen them over everything, and in choosing, I had finally become the man worthy of their love. November winds howled through Manhattan, stripping the last leaves from Central Park trees and rattling the penthouse windows like restless spirits. Weeks had passed since my staged death, and the city had moved on. Headlines faded, condolences dried up, the empire quietly thriving under Aaliyah's steady hand. But inside our home, time had frozen. I watched from hidden feeds, heart fracturing anew each day. Aaliyah moved through the rooms like a shadow of herself, hand always on her belly, eyes distant, face composed for Malik's sake but crumbling when alone. She wore my old cashmere sweaters now, sleeves too long, as though trying to hold on to warmth I had taken away. Nights found her on the terrace in the cold, staring at the city lights, tears silent on her cheeks. Malik asked for me constantly, small voice breaking as he clutched the wooden toys I had carved. Mrs. Kim comforted him with stories, but his confusion cut deepest. The grief I had forced upon them was unbearable. Remorse raged violent and unrelenting, for the pain my sacrifice caused, for the irrational cruelty of making them mourn while I lived. The inner turmoil had become a storm without end, love so fierce it demanded I return, fear so deep it whispered they were safer without me. Yet I held, waiting for inquiries to die, for danger to pass. Aaliyah, however, did not wait. She had always been stronger than I credited. One December morning, December 10th, 2025, she sat at my old desk in the study, papers spread before her. The legitimate empire's accounts, yes, but also private files Victor had left accessible. breadcrumbs I had not intended her to find so soon. A dojang seal, my personal seal, carved jade, pressed into wax on an envelope marked only with coordinates. A property deed in upstate New York, transferred quietly months ago. A bank statement with withdrawals matching my hidden location. Discovery dawned slowly on her face, confusion first, then shock, then a fierce, burning hope. She did not cry, she acted. That afternoon, she told Mrs. Kim she needed air, bundling Malik warmly, taking only a small bag. Guards accompanied her to Grand Central, where she dismissed them with quiet authority. Family business, I'll be safe. The train north took her through snow-dusted landscapes. She sat by the window, hand on her belly, feeling our daughter kick as though urging her onward. Fear flickered, fear of being wrong, of chasing a ghost, but determination overrode it.
I had chosen a remote property near the Canadian border. A modest lakeside house with Jeju-inspired stone paths and pine trees far from any road. Simple. Anonymous. A place to wait out the storm. Snow fell thick that evening as her car, rented under a false name, crunched up the hidden drive. I stood at the window, watching headlights approach, disbelief freezing me in place. She stepped out alone. Malik left safely with Mrs. Kim for this journey. Coat wrapped tight around her advanced pregnancy, snowflakes catching in her hair. I opened the door before she knocked. She stopped on the threshold, breath clouding in the cold. Shock hit her anew, eyes widening, body swaying with dizziness. She gripped the doorframe, face paling as reality crashed. "You're alive," she whispered, voice breaking. I reached for her, slowly, carefully. She did not pull away. Rain from the city had turned to heavy snow here. Flakes swirled around us as I pulled her inside, closing the door against the storm. Grief exploded then, months of bottled pain released in great racking sobs. She pounded my chest weakly, tears soaking my shirt. "You left us," she cried. "You made me bury an empty coffin. You made Malik cry every night." Each word was a blade. Remorse crested higher than ever, tearing me apart. "I know," I said, voice rough with my own tears. "I thought it was the only way." She pulled back, eyes blazing through tears. "The only way? To break us?" I dropped to my knees before her, humility I had never shown anyone, hands resting gently on her belly. "I was wrong," I confessed. "I thought power could protect you by removing myself. But I couldn't bear it. Not without you." Our daughter kicked strongly under my palm, as though greeting me. Aaliyah's anger fractured. She sank to her knees too, hands framing my face. "I followed the seal," she whispered. "The dojang. I knew you'd leave something." The quiet admission of her faith in me despite everything shattered the last walls. I kissed her desperately, snow melting on our skin, tears mingling. She responded with equal passion, hands clutching my coat, body pressing close despite her belly. We moved to the fire I had kept burning, undressing slowly by its light. Intimacy was reverent, careful, her body cradled, every touch worship. I kissed the stretch marks of her pregnancy, whispering apologies and love against her skin. "I choose you," she said fiercely as we came together. "Alive, here, always." Afterward, wrapped in blankets before the flames, she rested against me. "I grieved you," she said quietly, "but I never stopped loving you." The words healed wounds I had inflicted on myself. Malik arrived the next day, Mrs. Kim driving north. His joy at seeing me dissolved the last shadows. He climbed into my lap, small arms around my neck. "Daddy didn't leave," he said, as though explaining it to himself. "No," I promised, "never again." We stayed at the lake house through December, snow piling deep, world quiet. Aaliyah's due date approached, doctors visited discreetly. We planned the return, my miraculous survival from remote wilderness, injuries fabricated, story airtight. But more than strategy, we healed. In quiet, emotionally condensed nights, fire crackling, her head on my shoulder, Malik asleep nearby, I reflected on the journey. From the cold garage where I had claimed a starving mother with ruthless words, to this warm sanctuary where she had pursued me through grief.
At last, I stood still within a life that required no proving. I understood that I had not conquered her, I had been changed by her. Peace arrived late, but real. And in accepting it, I felt gratitude for having been saved from the man I once was. As snow fell outside and our daughter kicked within, I held my family close.
The pursuit had ended. The true life, chosen, not forced, had just begun. Spring returned to New York with gentle insistence, cherry blossoms blooming along the Brooklyn waterfront and in small community gardens we had helped fund. Our daughter, Sophia Grace, arrived on a warm April morning in 2025, healthy, crying lustily, with Aaliyah's dark eyes and my fair skin. Malik, now 5, held her tiny hand in awe, declaring her the best baby sister ever. We had returned to the city quietly after my miraculous survival, story of wilderness endurance, injuries that explained absence. The press accepted it. Old inquiries faded. The empire was fully legitimate now, spas thriving, foundations expanding across Harlem, Koreatown, and beyond. Aaliyah directed programs with quiet authority, her insight born of lived hardship shaping every decision. Scholarships for single mothers, food pantries that never turned anyone away, after-school care where children of every background played together. I stood back often, watching her lead. The man who had once commanded fear now commanded nothing but respect, and only when needed. The inner turmoil had quieted, but not vanished. Remorse lingered for the cold night I had claimed her with brutal words, for the years of poverty I could never fully erase from her memory. Yet gratitude had grown stronger. For her forgiveness, for the family she had given me, for the light she had brought into shadows I once called home. We renewed our vows on a quiet May evening, not in grandeur, but in the Harlem community garden that had become our shared heart. Simple wooden benches under blooming trees, children from the center as guests, Mrs. Kim and Victor the only witnesses from my old life. Aaliyah wore a flowing white dress that accommodated nursing, Sophia in her arms. Malik carried rings on a pillow made from leftover hanji paper. I spoke vows I meant with every fractured piece of my soul. To protect, to listen, to choose her every day. She spoke hers softly, voice steady with love. To stand beside me, to build together, to teach our children kindness over power. When we kissed, Malik cheered, children laughed, and Aaliyah's tears were joy, not pain. Years passed in gentle rhythm. Sophia grew curious and fierce like her mother. Malik protective and gentle like the father he saw in me now. We divided time between the city apartment, smaller now, warmer, and a house on Long Island Sound where waves lulled us to sleep. I mentored at-risk youth openly, teaching financial knowledge in community centers, sharing life lessons from immigrant roots to empire building without crime. Aaliyah curated cultural programs, blending African American and Korean American heritage. Storytelling nights, art classes, meals where grandmothers taught recipes side by side. Knowledge became our shared language. We taught our children that knowledge opens doors, poverty slams shut. Life lessons came not from lectures, but example. Compassion over dominance, education over fear. Knowledge of self, knowledge of others, knowledge that wealth means nothing without humanity. Education was our legacy. Scholarships in Sophia's name for girls in STEM, in Malik's for boys escaping cycles of violence. Life lessons woven into every grant. Education as freedom, knowledge as power, life lessons in resilience. One autumn evening, years later, we stood on the Long Island deck watching sunset paint the water gold. Sophia and Malik played on the beach below, building sandcastles that waves gently erased. Aaliyah leaned against me, hand in mine. "We made it," she said softly. I kissed her temple. "Because of you." Love had transcended everything, skin color, class, past sins. Wealth and poverty had bowed before it. Compassion and humanity had won. Knowledge, life lessons, education, these were the true inheritance we gave our children. Knowledge that love is choice, life lessons in forgiveness, education in building bridges where walls once stood. Knowledge of heart, life lessons in grace,
education in hope. To every viewer listening, may good health fill your days, joy light your path, and peace settle in your hearts each night. If this story touched you, if it stirred thoughts on love beyond boundaries, on second chances, on what truly matters, please like, subscribe, and share Crimson Romance stories. New tales arrive daily. How did this journey make you feel? Does it echo real life, the way love can heal even the deepest wounds? Share your thoughts, your emotions in the comments below. We read every one. Goodbye for now. See you in the next video.